Michael Turner was the kind of man everyone thought they knew. His wife, Laura, trusted him completely. Their daughter, Emily, believed her father was a protector. And Emily's best friend, Chloe, never imagined that stepping into their home would change her life forever. Behind closed doors, secrets grew darker each day, until one shocking discovery revealed a truth that shattered them all. Mark Turner lived in a quiet neighborhood where the lawns were neatly trimmed, the houses lined up in uniform rows, and the people believed nothing dark could touch their community. He was a man others looked up to, dependable in his work and polite in his manners. He wore the mask of an ordinary father so well that no one questioned his character. His daughter admired him, and her friends trusted him, which made what happened inside his house even more disturbing. Mark had grown used to controlling how others saw him, shaping himself into a figure of respectability, while secretly cultivating urges that he kept hidden from the outside world. The first signs were subtle, almost unnoticeable, the kind of interactions that could be explained away as innocent. Yet, behind every moment, there was intention, a deliberate choice that marked the beginning of a descent he could not turn back from once it had started. It began when his daughter invited one of her closest friends over more often. The girl was bright, cheerful, and eager to spend time in their home. Mark noticed her in ways he should never have, and instead of stepping back, he leaned in. He justified his actions by telling himself no one would ever know. What he told himself each day gave him courage to take the next step further. Soon he was creating opportunities, encouraging his daughter to invite the friend over more often, making sure she felt comfortable in the house. The girl trusted him as an adult, a figure of safety, unaware that he was deliberately pulling her closer into his web. The routine of their lives gave Mark cover. His wife was often busy with work, his daughter distracted by school and social activities, and the neighbors saw only what he wanted them to see. Each day seemed ordinary, with Mark driving his daughter to class, mowing the lawn, and chatting with neighbors about sports or the weather. But within those everyday moments, Mark was plotting, waiting for the times when no one else was watching. The secrecy of his actions gave him the thrill, a sense of control that fed into his growing obsession. He thought he had mastered the art of deception, believing he could live two lives, one for the world, and one hidden in the shadows of his home. The girl's presence became routine in the Turner household. She lingered after school, spent weekends with the daughter, and often joined them for meals. Mark's wife thought nothing of it, assuming her daughter had simply formed a close bond with her friend. She welcomed the girl warmly, never suspecting that her husband was paying far too much attention. Mark learned the girl's patterns, when she was vulnerable, when she was distracted, and when she could be manipulated. He used every ounce of charm he had to keep her from pulling away, weaving her into the fabric of his home life so seamlessly that no one thought twice about how often she was there. At first, the girl carried no suspicion. She saw Mark as her friend's father, someone who made jokes at the dinner table, asked about school projects, and offered rides when her own parents were busy. She was comfortable around him, never questioning his motives. But beneath that comfort, Mark was slowly testing boundaries, inching closer, pushing limits in ways that became harder to ignore as time passed. The risk of being discovered seemed to excite him even more, as if each day without suspicion confirmed his power over the situation. He believed he was too clever, too careful to ever be caught. The walls of the Turner home began to hold more secrets than anyone could imagine. Mark thrived on the illusion of normalcy, continuing to show up at work on time, engaging with neighbors, and helping his daughter with homework. To the outside world, he was a model parent. Yet in private, his actions grew bolder, his decisions more reckless. The more he got away with, the more confident he became. He convinced himself that he was untouchable, that no one would ever look closely enough to see through his disguise. His wife trusted him, his daughter adored him, and the friend he targeted had no one to protect her from what he was doing. But secrets never stay hidden forever. Even in those early days, the signs were beginning to form, small cracks in the perfect image he projected. The girl started behaving differently. her once bright spirit dimming slightly as she carried the burden of confusion and fear. She began withdrawing in subtle ways, but those around her were too distracted to notice. The daughter thought her friend was just moody, her mother chalked it up to teenage stress, and the neighbors never looked closely enough to see what was happening. Mark's careful planning made sure of that. He knew how to manipulate perceptions, how to present the version of himself that people wanted to see. Behind closed doors, however, he was no longer the man people thought he was. He had stepped across a line that could never be uncrossed, and he did it daily without hesitation. Each act drew him deeper into a darkness that would eventually consume him, though he refused to believe it at the time. He told himself it was under control, that he was smart enough to keep the secret forever. But deep down, even he must have known that the life he had built was balanced on a knife's edge, one misstep away from disaster. The smallest slip, the faintest suspicion, could bring it all crashing down. In the early stages, when his actions were just beginning, there was still a chance for the truth to emerge, a chance for someone to see through his mask. But no one did. Instead, he grew bolder, more convinced that he was safe. The girl remained trapped in silence, his daughter remained oblivious, and his wife remained trusting. Mark carried on as though nothing had changed, but in reality, everything had. The perfect image he projected was now a lie, a cover for the most disturbing truth hidden within the walls of his home. The story of Mark Turner began in this way, an ordinary father in an ordinary neighborhood, who used the trust of those closest to him as a weapon. His descent into darkness was not sudden, but gradual, built one small step at a time. And though no one yet knew it, the foundation of lies he had built was fragile. It was only a matter of time before the world he created shattered, exposing the horrifying truth to everyone who had once believed in him. The Turner household continued to appear like any other in the neighborhood. Each morning Mark left for work, his daughter prepared for school, and his wife juggled her responsibilities without suspecting anything unusual. From the outside, nothing seemed different, but inside the walls of their home, Mark's double life grew more dangerous. He had convinced himself that he could manage both realities without ever letting one overlap with the other. The more he carried on, the more he believed in his own ability to keep the secret. What he didn't realize was that subtle signs of change were already beginning to show in ways that could not be hidden forever. The daughter remained completely unaware at this stage, living her life with the innocence of someone who still trusted her family completely. To her, her father was a steady figure, someone who asked about her schoolwork, helped with rides to activities, and maintained the same predictable routines. But Mark was using that predictability as his shield. He knew she would never suspect him, because he still played the role of father flawlessly in her eyes. This gave him freedom to continue without interruption, and he grew more reckless as the days passed. The friend he had entangled in his secret life began to carry a weight she could not easily hide. At first, she thought she could pretend nothing was wrong, but the strain of secrecy started affecting her in visible ways. She became withdrawn in school, avoiding teachers and friends who might notice her discomfort. Her grades, once strong, began to slip. She stopped participating in activities she used to enjoy. These changes should have raised alarms, but those around her explained them away as common teenage struggles. In reality, she was fighting with the knowledge of what was happening in the Turner home, torn between fear of speaking out and the dread of being discovered. Neighbors, though unaware of the full truth, noticed something odd. They observed that the daughter's friends spent more and more time at the Turner house, often when the daughter herself was not there. Some assumed she was simply close with the family, comfortable enough to visit even without her friend. Others found it curious but not alarming enough to act upon. No one imagined that the reason for her frequent presence was far more sinister. To them, Mark was still the dependable man they waved to on the driveway, the one who smiled politely during neighborhood gatherings. His mask was intact, and his charm was enough to push away suspicion. Mark's wife was the least aware of all. She welcomed the daughter's friend warmly, seeing her as almost another member of the family. She had no reason to distrust her husband, and she was relieved that her daughter had such a close companion. The wife never once questioned why the girl seemed unusually quiet or why she lingered even when her daughter was busy elsewhere. She believed her home was safe, her marriage stable, and her family protected. The betrayal was hidden in plain sight, and she remained blind to it. Mark, however, began to feel the thrill of danger in new ways. The secrecy fed his confidence, and the daily repetition of his actions convinced him that he was untouchable. He had woven his lie so tightly into everyday life that even the people closest to him could not see through it. What he did not realize was that each repetition left traces, tiny, almost invisible cracks in his carefully built facade. The friend's shifting behavior, her reluctance to look adults in the eye, the way she sometimes avoided sitting with the family at meals, these were small signs, but signs nonetheless. The daughter, though still trusting, began to feel something was strange. It was not a clear understanding, but rather a faint sense of unease. She noticed her friend acting differently around her father. The way her friend avoided certain interactions or the nervousness in her body language did not go unnoticed. At first, she thought little of it, dismissing it as awkwardness. But as the weeks went on, the unease grew. She didn't voice her suspicions yet, but the seed had been planted. That seed would later grow into questions that would eventually shatter her perception of her father forever. The friend herself struggled in silence. She feared speaking up, worried that no one would believe her, and terrified of what would happen if she did. She carried the weight of her secret into every classroom, every dinner table conversation, and every restless night of sleep. The stress began to manifest in ways she could not control. Her parents noticed she seemed tired, distant, and less enthusiastic about the things she used to love. They tried to comfort her, assuming she was dealing with teenage emotions, but the truth was far more complicated. The girl was caught between her fear of exposing the secret and the shame that kept her silent. Mark's obsession with control deepened. He monitored his own actions carefully, ensuring that his wife remained unaware, that his daughter stayed distracted, and that the friend remained silent. He thought of himself as the orchestrator of a perfect lie, weaving a daily pattern that protected his secret from exposure. Yet the irony was that the very routine he relied on was the same thing that would eventually betray him. Patterns are noticed over time, and even the smallest irregularities can spark suspicion in the most unsuspecting observers. As the weeks turned into months, the cracks in the facade grew wider. The friend became increasingly uncomfortable visiting the Turner house, though she felt trapped into continuing. Her parents questioned why she spent so much time there, but she avoided their concerns with excuses. Mark's daughter, too, began questioning why her friend seemed less eager to hang out with her specifically, even as she continued coming to the house. These small inconsistencies started to form a larger picture, though no one had yet pieced it together. Mark believed he had mastered the art of secrecy, but the truth was already slipping into the open. His daughter's instincts were sharpening, his wife's trust was blinding her, and the friend's parents were quietly taking note of their child's strange behavior. The danger was no longer only in what Mark was doing, but in the growing likelihood that someone, somewhere, would connect the dots. The atmosphere in the Turner household was changing, even if Mark refused to see it. He carried on as though his secret was safe, not realizing that the shadows he hid in were growing thinner by the day. The perfect disguise that Mark had built still held in place for now. To the outside world, he was still the man everyone respected, the reliable father and husband who seemed devoted to his family, yet underneath, the reality was beginning to rot. The weight of his double life was pressing down harder, and while he thought he could maintain it indefinitely, the truth was circling closer. Secrets like his do not stay buried forever, and even the most careful lies eventually slip through the cracks. The Turner household was becoming a house of tension, and it was only a matter of time before the silence shattered. The first spark of suspicion began when the Turner daughter came home earlier than usual one afternoon. The house felt different the moment she stepped inside, as though the air was heavier and something was out of place. She couldn't explain why, but her instincts told her something was wrong. She noticed her father's nervous behavior and her friend's uneasy expression, small details that most people would overlook. At the time, she didn't know what it meant, but the memory stayed with her, buried in the back of her mind like a puzzle piece waiting to connect with others. That single moment planted a seed of doubt that would slowly grow into something she could not ignore. From then on, she began paying closer attention to things she had once dismissed. She noticed that her friend often avoided looking at her father directly, and when she did, there was a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. She also realized that her friend sometimes seemed tense when left alone in the same room with him, as if waiting for the chance to leave. At first, she thought she was imagining it, that perhaps her friend was simply shy or uncomfortable for unrelated reasons. But the more she watched, the more she saw patterns emerge. The feeling that something was off grew stronger with each passing day. She also noticed inconsistencies in her father's behavior. He used to be relaxed around the house, but now he seemed overly attentive whenever her friend was present. His tone shifted subtly, his focus lingering longer than it should. Small things, like the way he found excuses to be around when her friend visited, started to bother her. Once, she caught him looking at her friend with an intensity that unsettled her, though she couldn't explain why. She brushed it aside in the moment, but the unease it left behind stayed with her. The daughter felt torn between loyalty to her father and the nagging suspicion that something was wrong. She didn't want to believe it. To her, he was still the man who cared for her, supported her, and maintained their home. Yet the strange behaviors she kept noticing gnawed at her sense of security. To cope with the confusion, she confided in another friend outside the situation. She mentioned her worries in vague terms, not revealing details but hinting at her unease. The friend encouraged her to keep paying attention, to trust her instincts if she felt something wasn't right. That small conversation strengthened her resolve to watch more closely, even if she wasn't ready to confront the truth. Meanwhile, whispers began to form outside the Turner home. When the daughter mentioned her concerns to her peer, the story spread quietly through their circle. Teenage conversations carried fragments of suspicion, with some dismissing it and others believing there was something worth questioning. These whispers, though not yet loud, added to the undercurrent of tension surrounding the family. The daughter didn't realize it at the time, but the more she spoke, the more people began to observe and speculate. What had once been completely hidden was beginning to draw attention. The daughter's friend, the one caught in Mark's secret, became increasingly uneasy. She tried to hide her discomfort, but her body language betrayed her. The daughter began noticing how her friend seemed reluctant to spend the night, even though she had once enjoyed sleepovers without hesitation. She saw how her friend avoided conversations about her father, quickly changing the subject whenever his name was mentioned. These subtle reactions confirmed the daughter's suspicions. She didn't have proof yet, but her instincts screamed that her father was hiding something. Mark, for his part, remained convinced he had control. He dismissed the possibility that his daughter would notice, believing she was too young and too trusting to question him. He continued his routine, certain that his mask would not slip. What he failed to recognize was that his daughter's perspective had already shifted. She was no longer looking at him through blind trust, but through the lens of suspicion. And once suspicion takes hold, every small detail becomes evidence. The daughter began to test her observations. She would leave the room suddenly, then return quietly, trying to catch glimpses of her father's behavior when he didn't know she was watching. Sometimes she saw nothing unusual, but other times she noticed moments that confirmed her unease, her father hovering too close, her friend's stiff posture, or an awkward silence that filled the air when she walked back in. These small discoveries piled up in her mind, creating a picture she didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. The emotional toll grew heavier with each new suspicion. The daughter felt trapped between love for her father and loyalty to her friend. She wanted to protect them both, yet she also feared what might happen if her suspicions were true. The confusion weighed on her daily life. She became more withdrawn at school, distracted during conversations, and restless at night as her thoughts circled endlessly. Her trust in her father was eroding, replaced by a gnawing fear she didn't know how to express. Her friend, sensing her growing awareness, became even more distant. She avoided sleepovers altogether and began making excuses to limit her time in the Turner home. This shift did not go unnoticed by the daughter, who felt the gap widening in their friendship. What had once been carefree companionship now felt strained and heavy, as though an unspoken truth was standing between them. The daughter's confusion turned into determination. She knew something was wrong, and she would no longer allow herself to look away. Outside of the household, others began to notice changes as well. Teachers saw the daughter and her friends struggling in class, distracted and less engaged. The parents of other children whispered quietly among themselves, speculating about the odd closeness between the Turner household and the friend. The whispers grew louder, though still not enough to cause direct action. The pressure around the situation was building, invisible to Mark, who continued to believe he was untouchable. The daughter started piecing the puzzle together. Each memory, each strange glance, each uncomfortable silence became part of a larger picture. She didn't yet have proof, but she had enough to know that the man she once admired was not the same man she thought he was. The realization was devastating, shaking the foundation of her world. She felt betrayed and isolated, unsure of whom to trust or where to turn. The once stable home she lived in now felt like a place filled with secrets, every corner hiding shadows she could not escape. The cracks in Mark's carefully built double life were widening. His daughter's growing awareness, his friend's silence breaking into visible discomfort, and the whispers outside the home were converging into something unstoppable. Though he still believed his secret was safe, the truth was already circling closer. The illusion of control he clung to was slipping away piece by piece, and it was only a matter of time before his daughter, the one person he believed he had fooled completely, would uncover the full truth. The truth began to unravel when the girl's parents noticed the drastic change in their daughter. At first, they told themselves it was just normal adolescence, the usual storm of mood swings and emotions that came with growing older. But her behavior was far too different to be dismissed so easily. She had once been bright and engaged, full of energy and laughter, but now she was quiet, distant, and burdened by something she refused to speak about. She avoided meals with the family, struggled to make eye contact, and her grades continued to slip. Every effort to ask her what was wrong was met with silence or vague excuses. Her parents were patient at first, but worry gnawed at them until they could no longer ignore it. One evening they pressed her more firmly, unwilling to accept another excuse. The girl broke down, and through tears and stammering words, she finally revealed what she had been hiding. The story spilled out in pieces, each detail more horrifying than the last. Her parents sat frozen in shock, unable to believe what they were hearing. The betrayal was almost too great to comprehend. The man they had trusted, the father of their daughter's closest friend, had been exploiting that trust in ways too devastating to describe. Their disbelief quickly turned into fury, then into a determination to take action. The next morning, they contacted the authorities. They explained everything their daughter had confessed, their voices breaking as they relayed the nightmare they had only just discovered. The officers who took the statement were careful and calm, assuring the parents that an investigation would begin immediately. They knew the gravity of the situation and understood how carefully it would have to be handled. A case like this could not be rushed, but it also could not be delayed. Time was crucial, and evidence had to be gathered without alerting Mark to what was coming. Detectives began their work quietly. They started by interviewing the girl in a safe and private setting, where she could recount everything without fear of interruption. Each detail she provided became a piece of the larger puzzle. They asked about timelines, about when it had started, how often it happened, and what Mark had done to make her stay silent. The more she revealed, the more disturbing the picture became. It was clear this was not a one-time offense, but a pattern, deliberate and repeated over time. Her fear was evident, but so was her relief that someone was finally listening, finally taking her seriously. The investigators knew they needed more than testimony. They placed the Turner home under discreet surveillance, watching who came and went, noting patterns in Mark's behavior. They monitored the times the daughter's friend visited, comparing them to the statements she had given. Each observation confirmed the consistency of her account. Slowly, a timeline emerged, one that revealed just how long this had been happening and how calculated Mark's actions had been. He had hidden in plain sight, but no secret lasts forever under the scrutiny of trained eyes. Meanwhile, the daughter herself began to notice that her household felt different. Her father seemed tenser without realizing it, his careful mask slipping in moments of stress. Her mother, though still blind to the truth, noticed the tension but assumed it came from work pressures or family stress. The daughter, however, could sense that something larger was at play. She felt the silence between her father and her friend growing heavier, and the realization she had been trying to avoid was becoming impossible to ignore. When the truth finally reached her through whispers from outside the home, her world shattered. The day she learned what her friend had confessed to her parents, she felt as though the ground had been pulled out from beneath her. The suspicion she had carried for weeks suddenly crystallized into reality, and it was worse than she had ever imagined. The betrayal cut deeper than words could describe. Her father, the man she trusted more than anyone, had been living a lie. She felt sick, confused, and broken all at once. Her friend's distance, her nervous glances, her refusal to stay over all of it now made sense. What she had dismissed as teenage awkwardness was, in fact, the weight of a terrible secret. Detectives expanded their investigation, interviewing neighbors and others in the community who might have noticed something unusual. Some recalled small details that suddenly seemed significant: the girl spending long hours at the Turner house without the daughter present, or Mark's unusual attentiveness toward her. Alone, these observations had seemed meaningless, but pieced together, they supported the narrative the girl had revealed. The foundation of evidence was growing stronger with each day. For Mark, life went on as though nothing had changed. He continued his routines, oblivious to the storm closing in around him. He still greeted neighbors politely, still performed his fatherly duties, still maintained the illusion of normalcy. But behind that facade, detectives were preparing the case that would dismantle his carefully constructed double life. Each day he carried on, unaware that every step he took was being watched, every action recorded. His sense of control was an illusion, one that would soon collapse in the most public and humiliating way possible. The girl's parents remained deeply shaken but resolute. They supported their daughter through every step of the investigation, determined that she would not face this alone. They knew the road ahead would be long, filled with painful recollections and emotional battles, but they also knew justice had to be pursued. Their anger burned quietly beneath the surface, fueling their commitment to ensuring Mark faced the consequences of his actions. As the investigation advanced, the daughter found herself torn between devastation and denial. She wanted to believe there had been some mistake, some misunderstanding, but the evidence mounting against her father made it impossible to hold on to hope. The truth was undeniable, and it broke her in ways she could not explain. Her home, once a place of safety, now felt like a prison of betrayal. Every memory she had of her father was tainted, every smile, every word, every gesture now viewed through the lens of what he had done. The authorities moved cautiously but decisively, ensuring that when the time came to act, there would be no room for doubt. The evidence was compiled meticulously, the testimony secured, and the surveillance reviewed. Each detail built toward the inevitable conclusion. The mask Mark had worn so convincingly was about to be ripped away, exposing the darkness he had hidden behind it. The day of his arrest was approaching, though he remained blind to it. His family was beginning to fracture under the weight of the secret, the daughter spiraling into confusion and pain, and the girl finally beginning to feel the first sense of hope that justice would be served. The quiet neighborhood, unaware of what was unfolding in their midst, was about to witness a scene that would shock them to their core. Mark believed he still held control, but the truth was already out of his hands. The investigation had taken root, the evidence was undeniable, and the walls of his carefully built life were closing in. What had begun as a private betrayal was now a public crime, one that could no longer be hidden. The silence had been broken, and nothing could protect him from the reckoning that was about to arrive. The courtroom was silent as the final verdict was about to be read. Months of evidence, witness statements, and emotional testimonies had all led to this moment. The faces of those sitting in the gallery reflected a mixture of fear, anticipation, and exhaustion. Families who had once been connected by trust were now torn apart forever. The man at the center of the storm sat motionless, his hands folded, his eyes hollow and distant. He had denied responsibility until the very end, but the evidence painted a picture that no denial could erase. Investigators had pieced together a timeline that revealed a double life, one that was far more sinister than anyone had initially believed. The prosecution had presented a chilling narrative. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about manipulation, control, and obsession that grew unchecked for months. What began as an inappropriate bond spiraled into a calculated series of choices that destroyed lives. The jury had listened to hours of details that exposed how carefully he concealed his actions, how he masked his true self behind the facade of a family man. Every testimony struck like a dagger, reminding everyone of the fragile nature of trust and how easily it can be shattered. The defense had tried to paint another picture, one of misunderstanding, exaggeration, and misplaced anger. They argued that no crime had been committed, that everything was distorted by emotions. But the digital evidence, the hidden communications, and the eyewitness accounts left little room for doubt. Forensic experts traced patterns of behavior that were disturbingly consistent. His daily routines, once thought harmless, were revealed to have been part of a calculated plan. Each choice seemed ordinary on the surface but was designed to conceal a darker truth. When the final piece of evidence was presented, the courtroom fell into silence. It was the proof that tied together every suspicion, every unanswered question. The impact was undeniable. The judge's stern face never shifted, but the jurors exchanged uneasy glances. The realization that a trusted man had been capable of such a life shook everyone in attendance. Even those who had doubted the accusations at first could no longer deny what was laid out before them. The carefully constructed image of a devoted father and husband was nothing more than a mask hiding a dangerous reality. The sentencing phase was no easier. Family members spoke through tears, their words heavy with betrayal and anger. The daughter who had once looked up to him stood in front of the court, her voice shaking as she explained how her life would never be the same. Friends who once filled the home with laughter now avoided the family entirely, leaving only silence and shame. The ripple effect spread further than anyone had imagined. One man's actions had dismantled a community, leaving scars that could not be easily healed. The judge finally delivered the sentence, a punishment meant to reflect the seriousness of the crime. It was long and unyielding, ensuring that he would spend most of his remaining years behind bars. The gavel struck, and the sound echoed like a final nail sealing his fate. Some people in the room gasped, others cried, but everyone knew that nothing could undo what had been done. Justice was served, but the damage was permanent. As the officers led him away in handcuffs, he didn't resist. His face showed no anger, no regret, only emptiness. He had lived a double life for too long, and now the weight of it had crushed him completely. The whispers followed him out of the courtroom, but his silence was louder than any words. Behind the locked doors of a prison, he would no longer be able to control, deceive, or manipulate. His world had finally collapsed. For the family, healing would be slow, if it came at all. The daughter struggled with guilt, questioning how she hadn't seen the warning signs. The mother faced the burden of raising questions she would never truly answer. Neighbors and friends kept their distance, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The house that had once been filled with memories of ordinary life now stood as a reminder of secrets and betrayal. Every corner of it felt haunted, not by spirits, but by the weight of truth. The story spread beyond the community, making its way into newspapers, broadcasts, and whispered conversations. People dissected every detail, some with sympathy, others with judgment. But beneath the gossip and headlines, one truth remained clear. A trusted man had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The consequences were not just legal, but emotional, rippling across lives and leaving deep, invisible wounds. In the end, the case became more than just a trial. It became a warning. It showed how easily trust can be weaponized, how obsession can grow unnoticed, and how silence can protect the wrong people. It reminded everyone that evil often hides in plain sight, wearing the mask of normalcy. The darkness in this case didn't come from strangers lurking outside, but from someone within the circle of trust. That realization was perhaps the most disturbing part of all. Years later, the story still lingered in whispers, a cautionary tale that parents told their children and neighbors shared when warning each other about misplaced trust. It became a grim reminder that no one truly knows what lies behind closed doors. For the man who had once been respected, his name would forever be linked to betrayal, crime, and tragedy. For the victims, the pain never fully left. The scars served as proof of the danger that can live where least expected and the cost of trusting the wrong person,